What's good, gamers? Akalon here, and welcome back. With patch 10.17 just around the corner, I thought it a good idea to cover the new features coming in the patch and what we have to look forward to. We will also be taking a closer look at what I am hoping is a feeling only I have had for a while now, but based on recent interactions, I may not be the only one. The new patch is called Fury Incarnate and deals with Virak, having acquired a brand new boost in power from consuming a boatload of Shadow Flame. He has seemingly set his sights on the Emerald Dream. Lore-wise, this alone is enough to make me very excited for the new patch. The Emerald Dream has always been a mysterious place in World of Warcraft, and for a long time there has been hints about the corruption of the Dream, starting all the way back in Legion, as we then explored the nightmare, an infection created by Yogg-Saron and the Old Gods to conquer the Dream for their own schemes. WoW, however, isn't a game only played for its lore, and since we do not yet know what the story entails, this video will focus on the gameplay features we have to look forward to instead. The first addition to the patch comes in the form of the new Forsaken and Night Elf Heritage Armor questlines. These Heritage Armor quests have become a highlight for many players, not just for the cosmetics they offer, but also for the lore and story they add to the game. In fact, in 10.17, we have a ton of new cosmetics to look forward to, from new temporal shoulders to look more like Chromie, to new dragon riding cosmetics, and a literal crap house of new mounts. For collectors, this new patch is going to be a wet dream. We will also see a continuation of the very popular Tyr Ressurection Questline. Will this finally be the patch where we bring him back? He kinda has a lot to answer for. So much explaining to do. To be frank, we found some books that really doesn't paint him, the other keepers, or the titans in the best light. Lastly, we have Dreamsurges, the big feature of the patch. This will see each of the original zones of Dragonflight be invaded on a weekly basis. During an invasion, all world quests in the area will become Dream World Quests. They will offer new rewards as well as Dream Coalescence, a currency required for Dreamsurges. New rares will spawn in the zone that will require groups of players to take down. These rares will not only offer Dream Coalescence, but also updated gear for faster gearing and catching up to the current item level. Every 30 minutes, a Dream event will occur across the map that will require players to complete events to collect Dream Coalescence and gear. Finally, a Druid of the Flame Lieutenant will spawn. Killing it will also reward some nice goodies. This is all terribly exciting, isn't it? Well, here's the problem. I have played this before. In fact, I have played this exact same game mode many times before. This is where, sadly, the video needs to take a bit of a detour. For the last few months, I have had this strange feeling. At first, I thought I was alone in this. Perhaps I was just not picking up what Blizzard was putting down. Over the last month or so, I have been paying very close attention to my own comment section, Twitter, Reddit, and the Blizzard forums. And sadly, I do not think this is a feeling only I have. Many players are growing bored with the WoW system. The new patches are coming out faster than ever before, but it seems like with every patch, less and less hype is generated for the patch. I would be interested to know if any of you have felt the same way. I want to be crystal clear. Dragonflight is a fun expansion. It feels amazing. The freedom in not being forced to log in every day, the pace of the patch cycles, always feeling like there is something new to do in the game, and never feeling like you're so far behind that it would not be worth even trying to catch up. The story has also been very well told, and it's clear that Blizzard has a strong vision for where they want the story and game to go. So why then does it feel so empty? This is everything I want from WoW. Freedom to play when I want and not being forced to play all the time. A good story that leaves me constantly speculating on the future. What is going on? Going through a lot of feedback, there seems to be one common complaint. I like the game. I like how it is now. I just don't feel like playing. There are, of course, more specific complaints, especially from the raiding and the dungeon community, not to even mention the PvP community. Those people are the only ones that have been very unhappy with the expansion since launch. Many of the more specific complaints come from balancing issues, where certain classes are so broken, if you do not play it, you may as well go home. Balancing is always going to be a problem in a game like World of Warcraft, especially since if you overbalance, the game ends up feeling bland and boring, and if you do not balance the game at all, it ends up broken. It is not a task I envy. I, however, want to focus on the more common complaint. I like it. I just don't want to play. This complaint is very scary. You see, when players quit your game for a specific reason, it's usually easy to solve. Simply find a solution to their problem and they'll come back. Take the balance and class disparity issue. If Blizzard can nail class balance in dungeons and PvP, most of those complaints are solved that very instant. You may be thinking, hold on, Akalon. Didn't you just say balance is never going to be easy? How in the hell can it then suddenly be easy to solve? Well, I said it won't be easy to solve in a game like World of Warcraft. I never said that it is in general a super hard problem to solve. It is my belief that the WoW devs need to change their approach to class balance. Up until now, there has always been this single philosophy in WoW. Classes need to play the same always, everywhere. Whether you are in a raid, a dungeon, or in the outside world, classes need to behave and play the same. This used to include PvP until Blizzard realized that this was creating far more problems than it solved. In my estimation, we are now at that very crossroads in every aspect of WoW. Dungeons and raids aren't the same thing. They do not attract the same crowd and do not follow the same logical rules. For them to be balanced the same doesn't make sense. I get that Blizzard wants a sense of cohesion, but sadly that cohesion also renders certain specs completely unplayable in certain types of content. Take Affliction Warlock. Historically a very strong raiding spec, since Affliction has a very slow and controlled ramp up period, but once it gets going, it melts health pools. This very playstyle, however, makes it nearly always the bottom pick for Mythic Plus, where burst and quick damage is far more desirable. By changing the rule set and logic based on the content, most if not all of these issues can be resolved in a very short amount of time. Yes, it will feel slightly awkward knowing your class plays completely different based on where you are and what content you're doing, but you also have the freedom to do all content with your chosen class and spec. Sadly, the more common complaint has no easy fix. In the previous complaint, there is a clear reason, a clear line of thinking. If you address this line of thinking, you solve the problem. But how do you solve a problem that doesn't exist? Or more accurately, how do you solve a problem that players can't explain? I like the game. I just don't feel like playing. This is an impossible problem, because where do you even start trying to apply a solution? What do you change? How do you change it to make sure players like the game and also like playing it? I believe, identified the fundamental issues, and I believe I know how to solve them. Well, kinda. So let's start with the basic pillars of the game, and you will see that there is a common theme that rolls throughout this entire video. See if you can spot it early. I start with raiding because historically it has always been one of WoW's strongest elements. Raiding has become overly stagnant. While yes, raids have become far more technical than ever before, they have also become a lot more complicated for complication's sake. They're also way too convoluted. We have too many raid tiers, LFR, normal, heroic, and mythic. This leads to several problems in WoW. It allows players at minimum to run the same raid at least 4 times a week. And since many players will min-max, even if it is to their own detriment, this becomes a problem. We used to have normal and heroic raid, 10 and 25 man. Most players slotted into one or the other. Very few people did both 10 and 25-man. Since 25-man gear was simply so much better, players who had time would do them. Everyone else joined a 10-man guild and would sometimes try and pug a 25-man on the weekends. Now, with gear upgrades, even LFR gear can become useful, and therefore, if it doesn't drop in Heroic or Mythic, the LFR version will do, at least for a bit. This leads to a two-part problem. Gearing becomes way too fast, meaning there are very few goals to chase in WoW outside of the first month's grind, and it leads to burnout. I'm not suggesting that gearing is broken overall, but I do think WoW currently misses a few key chase items. It is fine to have most of your gear drop at a relatively decent pace, but in the past, we would hunt tier gear for most of a patch's lifecycle. Now, everyone gears within the first 2 weeks to a month. What then becomes the motivation to play? Raiding has also just not evolved. It still follows the same logic and structure it has always done, and while bosses have more mechanics than ever before, I believe a lot of players have become bored with the same thing every patch, with different colors and a different setting. It may benefit the devs to start thinking outside the box, make raids big, make them silly, and yes, make them ridiculous. Players may appreciate the change of pace. I also think there is far too much focus on race to world first. The reality is, while race to world first is a boon to WoW and great marketing, it is important to remember that 99.9% of WoW players will never partake in race to world first and have zero desire to do so. I'm not suggesting here that the devs do a great job of balancing the game for RWF, because generally they do not. But I do think the current format of raids, the layout and boss design, is done to accommodate the RWF raiders rather than just making the raids cool and extravagant. I also believe that there has been a stagnation, or perhaps reluctance, when it comes to raid sizes. We seem to have settled on the approach that a raid must have many bosses to be considered a good raid, but perhaps multiple smaller raids with fewer bosses may make for an interesting change of pace. When WoW introduced Mythic Plus in Legion, it was hailed by many players as a breath of fresh air. It was amazing to finally have a way to push difficult content with smaller groups, and it gave dungeons longevity that they simply never had. Since then, Blizzard have continually refined the Mythic Plus system. We now get 8 dungeons every expansion, along with a mega dungeon that will eventually get split into 2 for Mythic Plus. One complaint about Mythic Plus that has been constant since its introduction has been affixes. Never affixes in general, but every patch there would always be a handful of affixes that would be so hated that most players would simply avoid certain dungeons when certain affixes are live. In Dragonflight, the devs finally removed seasonal affixes, which went a long way to making most dungeons a lot more accessible. Yet the complaints have not stopped. From complaining about class balance to god comps, the complaints have continued to mount for this once beloved feature. It is easy to think that all the devs need to do is get class balance right, and then everything will slot neatly into place. But I would argue this is a fallacy. The class disparity in Mythic Plus is born from an affix system that is fundamentally broken. Affixes were meant to change the way you approach a dungeon. It was meant to change the way you play your class, often requiring you to change your talents and maybe even your spec to deal with them. While in a vacuum, this seems like a great idea, in reality, due to the min-max nature of players, this has resulted in the over-optimization of classes. Players found that certain compositions are simply better at dealing with the convoluted affixes, and thus, these classes became the gold standard. We saw this clearly displayed with the introduction of Orgvoker. Yes, it is a strong spec, but I would argue its value comes from allowing groups that have an Orgvoker to simply ignore certain affixes or otherwise making those affixes less impactful. Truthfully, affixes do not really change the way you play the dungeon in any meaningful way. Most of them simply make playing the dungeon far more annoying, and for some classes, just straight up impossible. Now, Ian have said in the past that they do not want a trick or treat style affix system since Mythic Plus is meant to be hard, but by affixes simply applying tricks, it has made Mythic Plus fundamentally just less fun. I would further argue that dungeons suffer from the same problem raids do. They have stagnated. Bosses rarely have interesting mechanics, and you need only do dungeons on heroic or normal to realize just how boring these bosses are. Without the affixes, most bosses are nearly impossible to fail, and it's almost as if the bosses were designed to simply be a backdrop to supply affixes to. I remember a time where we would spend an entire Saturday in heroic dungeons doing the achievements for all dungeons, since the achievements alone actually made the dungeons much more difficult. These days, the dungeons without affixes have become so standardized that no amount of achievement requirements could make them hard. Now, this isn't true for every dungeon, and there are dungeons that have held up well and really feels good, even without affixes. But this is certainly true for many dungeons. Now, I get it. Making sweeping changes to a feature that has historically been very popular will be scary. The last thing you want is to make changes and lose the players you still have left. But by trying to keep the players you have, you may be losing out on potential new players. Competition in video games will always exist. Players turned Mythic Plus into a competitive scene because they enjoyed them. They were new, but now, after 6 years, they aren't new anymore, and fewer players are having fun in these dungeons. Another major flaw with Mythic Plus is the timer. Now, I'm not saying the timer needs to go, or that groups shouldn't have a time to try and push themselves harder, but the current system of key depletion, in my view, creates an unnecessary level of stress on the players, which inevitably will lead to players being far less forgiving, and as a result, we will see more players chasing the god comps or golden standards, not to mention players just generally being more toxic. In the end, WoW is meant to be fun. The game is meant to be enjoyed. By turning everything into a competition and offering no alternative, it leads to even unwilling players having to opt into the competition if they wish to get anything done. Perhaps a good idea here would be to offer two types of Mythic Plus, one timed and one untimed, where gear is the same, but to rank, one needs to push the timed keys. This will allow those who seek to rank a practice ground of sorts, while also offering those who only care about a fun afternoon with their friends content to enjoy. It is time for the devs to be bold, to try something new, change it up, throw out the current handbook, be wacky, be strange. It has always been WoW's greatest strength. By overly focusing on the competitive scene, you tend to ruin the fun of the game. The players will still compete. It is in our nature. Now, back to Dreamsurges. Remember how I said I have played this feature before? Well, turns out I first played this feature all the way back in Mists. This was the Timeless Isles. I then played this feature again in WoD in the final patch, then again in Legion on the Broken Shore, then in BFA, then in Shadowlands, and now in Dragonflight. I have had this feature in 10.07 with the Forbidden Reach. I then played it again in 10.1 in Zaralak Cavern, and again played this feature in 10.1.5 with Time Rifts, and now I am playing it again in 10.17. At its core, this isn't a new feature. The basic gameplay loop is the same as it has always been. Kill rares, do world quests, get loot. So you've combined invasions with Timeless Isles, but it is still a feature I have seen repeatedly. It isn't enough to get me hyped when I can see the remnants of previous systems simply being thrown together to make something seem new. It's amazing to see the speed of the content with which Dragonflight has blessed us. But when that content seems to just be the same content repurposed from previous patches, then it very quickly starts to feel bland and boring. You can give me the same soap on a rope you gave me last year, simply in new packaging, but I will very quickly realize this is the same soap on a rope, and soon I won't even open the package. I would also like to make this clear. Rares used to be rares because they were, well, rare. A rare isn't a rare when it respawns every 10 minutes and when this happens every single patch. At that point, it just becomes a slightly more difficult mob. One of two things is true for modern WoW. Either the devs are too afraid of making too many changes out of fear of losing their existing player base, or it's been so long since they needed to be creative that they have forgotten how to be creative. Either way, this is a problem. When you make something to not lose your existing players, you often lose out on new players. Since new players want to be wowed, they want juicy new things that move the genre forward. WoW used to be the golden standard of content. The devs weren't afraid to take risks, and players rewarded them for it. However, more and more, it is felt as if the devs are so paralyzed by fear that they refuse to stray too far off the beaten path. Dragonflight has been a step forward in so many ways. From the content pacing and patch cycles to the way the story is handled, to amazing new features such as dragonriding and a myriad of cosmetic and customization options it now offers us. But increasingly, it feels like the content itself has become hollowed out vehicles that simply delivers the new rewards rather than the content itself being a reward. In many ways, Dragonflight returned to its roots, but in some ways, it still has a very long way to go. I would like to see WoW take chances again. Yes, it will fall flat. Sometimes it will be a massive failure. But if we the players can see you're trying, we will stick with you. I have not given up on WoW, and I am assuming, since you're watching this video, you haven't either. I want this game to be great. I grew up with it, and it has been my livelihood for quite a few years now. But fundamentally, WoW needs to adapt. The devs need to take the next step and really embrace the freedom that only an MMO can provide. Do something new. Make a mistake. Make it perfect. We want you to succeed. If anything in this video resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe for more content. If you feel like I've missed something or I made a mistake somewhere, use the comment section to tell me what I got wrong. I am always happy to learn and grow. As always, a huge shout out to the patrons, the YouTube members, and the Twitch subs of the channel. If you want to be cool like these guys and help form a bulwark against unnecessary sponsorships that waste your time, consider giving me just $1 a month. It will be appreciated. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.